"Ma'am, I don't care what that piece of paper says, if you don't get that steamroller off my property in the next 30 seconds, I'm parking my excavator on top of your Mercedes." That was the first thing I yelled when I pulled up to my house and saw the impossible, a paving crew, an actual industrial road crew, smoothing out fresh, steaming blacktop right over the side yard I'd owned for 15 years. And standing there, directing traffic like she was conducting the New York Philharmonic, was Eleanor. Eleanor Ashford. A woman who looked like she'd been manufactured in a lab dedicated to producing homeowners association presidents, wearing a white pantsuit that cost more than my first 3 cars combined, holding a clipboard like a weapon. She didn't flinch when I yelled, she didn't look guilty, she just turned to her husband, Sterling, a guy who looked like he was allergic to conflict and manual labor, and said loud enough for me to hear, "Tell him to wait, we're almost finished with the annex." The annex. That's what she called the 20-foot strip of my land she decided to steal on a Tuesday morning while I was at work. But before we get to the legal war that ended with the most beautiful blue porta potty in history, you have to understand the layout. See, I live in Oakhaven, a neighborhood that's older than most of the people living in it, big trees, weird property lines, and absolutely, 100%, no homeowners association. That was the selling point. I restore classic muscle cars, I'm a grease monkey, I like loud engines, I have a detached shop in the back, and I have a wide, gravel side yard where I park my trailers and donor cars. It's not a junk pile, but it's not a botanical garden either, it's a working man's yard. Then the Ashfords moved in next door. They bought the old Victorian place that had been empty for a year, and from day one, Eleanor looked at my property the way a health inspector looks at a rat infestation. She didn't introduce herself with a pie, she introduced herself with a suggestion. She walked over while I was waxing a '69 Chevelle and asked if I had considered visual screening for my industrial equipment. I told her I'd consider it when she considered paying my mortgage. That was the moment the Cold War started, but I figured, hey, live and let live, right? She'd stay on her side with her manicured boxwoods, and I'd stay on mine with my horsepower. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It started small, subtle boundary pushing, literally. I'd come home and find her landscapers had mowed 5 feet into my grass. I'd find little pink flags marking utility lines that didn't exist. Then came the letters. Not from the city, not from the county, but from the Oakhaven Community Standards Committee. A committee that consisted entirely of Eleanor, Sterling, and their terrified cat. They'd cite me for visual blight, noise pollution, and failure to adhere to curbside aesthetics. I threw them in the trash, every single one, because again, and I cannot stress this enough, we don't have an HOA. We are free people. But Eleanor, she operated on a frequency of entitlement that normal physics doesn't apply to. She knocked on my door one evening, Sterling hovering behind her like a ghost, and handed me a map. A map she'd drawn. "We've been looking at the flow of the street," she said, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary southern charm that's actually venom in disguise, "and we realized that your side yard is actually a natural easement. It would really elevate the property values if we paved it to create a shared turnaround. We entertain a lot, and street parking is just so common." I stared at her. "Eleanor, that's my driveway. I own it. I have the deed. You're not paving my dirt." She just smiled, that tight, pitying smile. "Well, we're willing to pay for the improvement. You wouldn't even have to lift a finger." "The answer is no," I said, closing the door. I thought that was the end of it. I thought, surely, nobody is crazy enough to just pave someone else's land after being explicitly told no. Fast forward to that Tuesday. I'd left early for a job, I run a heavy equipment rental business now, and when I came back around noon to grab a different trailer, the air smelled like tar and audacity. There they were. They hadn't just paved a strip, they had graded my gravel, ripped out my side fence, and laid down a seamless, jet-black asphalt carpet connecting their driveway to my side yard, creating this massive, sweeping entrance that looked like it belonged to a hotel, not a residential house. I slammed my truck door so hard the window rattled. I marched right into the wet heat of the asphalt. What is this? Who authorized this? I screamed at the foreman. The guy looked terrified, pointing at Eleanor. She said she owned the lot. She showed us paperwork. I turned to Eleanor. You forged a deed? Don't be dramatic, she scoffed, waving a hand as if swatting away a fly. It's a revitalization project. The Standards Committee approved it this morning. We're doing you a favor, really. This increases your equity. Plus, Sterling needs a place to park the boat. I don't care about Sterling's boat. I yelled, and I could feel my blood pressure ticking up like a bomb timer. This is trespassing. This is vandalism. You are going to tear this up, right now. We certainly will not, Sterling piped up, trying to sound authoritative but just sounding squeaky. The asphalt is already down. It's curing. To remove it now would be wasteful. We can discuss a usage agreement later, but for now, please move your truck, you're blocking the aesthetic flow. That was the trigger. Aesthetic flow. They had stolen 3,000 square feet of my property, destroyed my drainage, and removed my fence, all because they wanted a wider place to park their luxury SUVs, and they were banking on the fact that I'd just roll over because it was already done. They thought I was just some mechanic who would be intimidated by their suits and their big words. They thought the hassle of fighting them would be too much for me. I looked at the foreman, who was rapidly packing up his tools because he smelled a lawsuit. I looked at the fresh blacktop, steaming in the sun. And then I looked at Eleanor, who was already instructing her landscapers to place potted ferns on my new pavement. Okay, I said. My voice dropped. The yelling stopped. That scared them more than the screaming did. Okay. You think this is your driveway now? It's our shared community access, Eleanor corrected, smugness radiating off her like heat waves. Right, I nodded, backing away toward my truck. Shared. You want to play neighborhood improvement? Let's play. I drove away. I didn't go to a lawyer. Not yet. I went to my warehouse. See, the thing about owning a heavy equipment rental company is that I have access to things. Big things. Messy things. And if Eleanor wanted to claim that strip of land was shared, she was going to have to share it with whatever I decided to store there. I sat in my office, looking at the inventory list. I could have gone with just parking my old rusted-out parts trucks there, but that was too easy. Too expected. No, Eleanor wanted landscaping. She wanted natural elements. So, I picked up the phone and called my buddy who runs a supply yard. Hey, Jimmy, I said, leaning back in my chair, watching the security feed of my own house on my phone where Eleanor was currently measuring the width of my land for her new gate. You know that organic compost blend you guys just got in? The really rich stuff. The stuff that smells like a barnyard exploded? Yeah. I need 20 yards of it. And I need 10 tons of number 3 gravel. The big, jagged stuff that ruins tires. Where's it going? Jimmy asked. Side yard, I said. Right on the new pavement. Don't dump it on the dirt, Jimmy. I want it right on the blacktop. Make it a mountain. You got it, boss. I went home, poured a coffee, sat on my front porch, and waited. The Ashfords were hosting a garden party that evening to inaugurate their new driveway. I could see the caterers setting up high-top tables on my land. They had strung fairy lights from my oak tree to their porch. It looked lovely. Really, it did. Until the dump trucks arrived. The sound of a heavy diesel engine downshifting is music to my ears, but to Eleanor, it must have sounded like the trumpet of the apocalypse. The first truck, a massive triaxle loaded to the brim with steaming, dark, pungent compost, rumbled down the street. The ground shook. The caterers froze. Eleanor came running out, a glass of Chardonnay in her hand. No. No deliveries. We have guests coming, she shrieked, waving her arms. The driver, God bless him, didn't even look at her. He checked his clipboard, looked at me sitting on the porch. I gave him a thumbs up and pointed directly at the center of the fresh asphalt, right where the buffet table was being set up. He threw the truck in reverse. The beeping sound, beep, 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 drowned out Eleanor's screaming. He backed right up to the property line, engaged the PTO, and the bed started to rise. Stop. You're ruining the finish. Sterling yelled, running out in his loafers. The tailgate banged open, and 20 yards of hot, heavy, decomposing organic matter slid out in a glorious, unstoppable avalanche. It buried the spot where they planned to put the string quartet. It blocked their connection to my land completely. The smell hit them a second later, a thick, earthy wave of manure and rot. But I wasn't done. As that truck pulled off, the second one pulled in. This one was carrying the gravel. Big, sharp, limestone rocks. The driver dumped it right behind the mulch, creating a second barrier, a fortress of stone. I walked down to the fence line, or where the fence used to be. Eleanor was hyperventilating. Sterling looked like he was going to cry. What is this? Eleanor hissed, her face purple. This is a health hazard. I'm calling the police. It's landscaping, I said calmly, taking a sip of my coffee. I'm testing the soil drainage. And the gravel? That's for erosion control. You know, since you paved over the natural ground, I had to take immediate mitigation steps. It's all very technical. You blocked our driveway. My driveway, I corrected. And since it's my land, I can store my dirt wherever I please. Enjoy the party, Eleanor. I hear that compost really opens up the nasal passages. That was just the opening salvo. They thought the mulch was bad. They had no idea what was coming next. Because the police did show up that night, and what happened when they looked at the deed, well, that's when the real fun began. The police officer, a tired-looking veteran named Sergeant Miller, stood in the middle of the street, bathed in the flashing blue lights of his cruiser. On one side of him stood Eleanor and Sterling, looking like victims of a natural disaster, gesturing wildly at the mountain of steaming mulch. On the other side stood me, leaning against my mailbox, calm as a cucumber. He's crazy. Eleanor shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. He dumped toxic waste on a community easement. He's blocking emergency access. He's devaluing the entire block. Sergeant Miller looked at the pile of dirt. He sniffed the air. He looked at the fresh, unauthorized asphalt underneath it. Then he turned to me. Sir, is this your dirt? Yes, sir, I said. High-grade organic compost. Very expensive. And is this your property? It sure is, I said, pulling the folded copy of my deed and the latest county survey from my back pocket. I'd been carrying them around for weeks, waiting for this moment. Property line runs right through that decorative hydrangea bush she planted, extends 10 feet past that pavement they laid without my permission, and ends at that old oak tree. The dirt is sitting smack dab in the middle of my lot. The sergeant looked at the paperwork. He looked at Eleanor. Ma'am, did you pave this man's land? We improved the neighborhood, she argued, totally missing the point. We created a shared asset under the authority of the Oakhaven Preservation Committee. Is that a registered HOA? The sergeant asked. It's a developing entity, Sterling mumbled, looking at his shoes. So, no, the sergeant sighed. He handed me back my papers. Ma'am, this is a civil dispute. If he wants to pile dirt on his own property, that's his right. If you paved his land without a permit or permission, well, frankly, you're lucky he's only using dirt and not pressing charges for destruction of property yet. My advice? Don't touch his dirt. He got in his car and drove away. The silence that followed was heavy. The party guests, who had been watching from the safety of the porch, started quietly shuffling back to their cars. The smell of the manure was really settling in now, mingling with the expensive perfume of defeat. "You'll hear from our lawyers," Eleanor hissed, turning on her heel. "You think you've won? This is just the beginning. You are a blight on this community." "Good night, Eleanor," I called out. For the next 3 days, the standoff continued. They couldn't use the new driveway because of the mulch and gravel mountains. They had to park on the street, which drove Eleanor insane because she felt it was low class. But I knew they were plotting. I saw them taking photos. I saw high-priced attorneys in suits walking the property line, shaking their heads. Then, I got the letter. A summons. They were suing me. Not for the land, they knew they couldn't win that, but for intentional infliction of emotional distress, nuisance, and loss of enjoyment of property. They were claiming my spite dirt was a biological weapon. They wanted an emergency injunction to force me to clear the driveway. I called my lawyer, a sharp-witted guy named Saul who lived for cases like this. He laughed so hard when I told him the story he started choking. "Let them sue," he said. "We'll countersue for trespassing, vandalism, conversion of property, and legal fees. But Jack, if you really want to drive the point home, you need to make sure that land is being used for something unmistakable." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well," Saul said, "if it's just a pile of dirt, they can argue it's temporary waste. If it's a necessary facility for your workers, say, a sanitary station, then it's a protected usage." I smiled. A wicked grin spreading across my face. The next morning, the delivery truck arrived. It wasn't carrying dirt. It was carrying the piece de resistance. A porta-potty. But not just any porta-potty. I had specially requested the brightest, most neon electric blue unit they had. I had the driver place it right at the edge of the asphalt, facing directly toward the Ashford's dining room window. It was the crown jewel. To add insult to injury, I zip-tied a laminated sign to the door that read, "Private property, staff restroom, do not block." When Eleanor came out and saw the blue monolith towering over her boxwoods, I thought she was going to have a stroke. She didn't scream this time. She just stared at it, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The aesthetic was ruined. Her grand entrance now looked like a construction site for a circus. The court date arrived 2 weeks later. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Eleanor and Sterling sat there with a team of 3 lawyers. I sat there with Saul. Their lawyers started with a grand speech about how I was a neighbor from hell, acting out of malice to destroy the sanctity of the Ashfords' home. He showed pictures of the mulch. He showed pictures of the porta-potty, which the judge actually squinted at with some amusement. He argued that the HOA guidelines, while informal, represented the spirit of the community. Then it was our turn. Saul didn't give a speech. He just started asking questions. He put Sterling on the stand. "Mr. Ashford," Saul asked, adjusting his tie. "Did you, or did you not, hire a contractor to pave over 800 square feet of Mr. Jack's property?" We believed the boundary was fluid," Sterling stammered. "Fluid?" Saul held up the deed. The county survey from 1985, 1998, and 2010 all show a straight line. "Did you hire a surveyor before you paved?" "Well, Eleanor, she has a very good eye for space," Sterling said. "She paced it out." The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Holloway, leaned forward. "You paced it out. You annexed your neighbor's land based on pacing. It was for the betterment of the view." Eleanor blurted out from the plaintiff's table, unable to help herself. "Silence," the judge snapped. Saul continued. "And regarding the HOA, is there a charter? Are there dues? Is there a legal board?" "It's a voluntary coalition," Sterling whispered. "So, it's imaginary," Saul said. You invaded my client's land, destroyed his fence, poured toxic chemicals, asphalt is a chemical, isn't it, onto his soil, and now you're suing him because he put a toilet on his own property? The courtroom was dead silent. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. Judge Holloway took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked at the Ashfords like they were toddlers who had drawn on the walls with permanent marker. In 20 years on the bench, she began, her voice low and dangerous, I have seen some frivolous lawsuits. But this is a masterclass in arrogance. She looked at Eleanor. Mrs. Ashford, you do not own the neighborhood. You barely seem to understand the concept of owning your own house. You trespassed. You vandalized this man's property. And then you dragged him here to complain that his reaction wasn't pretty enough for you. But the porta potty, Eleanor squeaked, is on his land. The judge slammed her gavel. Here is my ruling. Judgment for the defendant on all counts. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, on the countersuit. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, you are ordered to remove the asphalt, the lighting, and any other improvements you made to the defendant's land within 10 days. You will pay for professional soil remediation to remove any contaminants. You will pay to rebuild his fence. And you will pay every single dime of his legal fees. She paused, looking at me with a slight smirk. As for the porta potty, while I agree it is an eyesore, the court finds no legal basis to order its removal from private property. That is up to Mr. Jack. Walking out of that courthouse felt like floating. Eleanor was sobbing into a silk handkerchief. Sterling looked like he was mentally calculating how much this was going to cost. Spoiler alert, it was in the tens of thousands. The next week was the most satisfying week of my life. I sat on my porch and watched a demolition crew, hired by the Ashfords, jackhammer up the pristine driveway they had laid less than a month ago. I watched them dig up the soil. I watched them build me a brand new, beautiful cedar fence, nicer than the one I had before. And the porta potty? I left it there for the entire duration of the construction. The workers actually used it, so it was functional, just like I said. 2 months later, a "for sale" sign went up in the Ashfords' yard. The listing described the house as having motivated sellers. I guess the neighborhood spirit wasn't enough to keep them there after the whole block found out what they'd done. The new neighbors who moved in are a young couple who drive a beat-up Jeep and like to barbecue. They asked me on day one where the property line was, and we shook hands on it. I finally had the porta potty hauled away the day the Ashfords' moving truck pulled out. As they drove past my house, Eleanor staring straight ahead, refusing to look at me, I gave a little wave. It just goes to show you, you can have all the money, all the suits, and all the curb appeal in the world. But if you try to steal a man's land and tell him it's for his own good, well, you might just end up paying for the privilege of staring at a blue plastic toilet.